2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. After the king was settled in his palace and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am living in a palace of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." Here ends our reading. There's a response of thankfulness that's printed for us there in our bulletins. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks indeed. Let's pray. Last week we began to talk about this in verses 1 and 2, the pleasantness of rest. And my daughter caught a peek of me this week. We were waiting to go somewhere, and she was still upstairs. And I told you about how my dad, who's a farm kid, a dairy farmer, sometimes his dad would just in the middle of the field or in front of the barn, he would just take a breather for about 2 minutes, and he would just lie on his back right there on the good old earth, head against the dirt or against the grass or whatever they were in, and say, "Hey, Carl, come over here." That's my dad's name. And they'd just sit there. And one time my dad did that with me as well, and I remember that just well. One of those images I have in my head, my dad my left and me, and just sitting with our feet on the concrete under the basketball goal, and our torsos and heads on the grass that we had been, I don't know what we were doing, pruning trees or mowing the grass or whatever, but just how good that feels to us to rest when we've been working and are weary. And so this week as I waited for Tessa, and just by the inside of the house, by the garage door, just lay on my back there on the hardwood floor, and it felt good. Rest is very pleasant for us. Ever wake up on a Saturday morning, perhaps, if you don't work on Saturdays and you've gotten a little bit extra sleep, and you actually wake up and you think, man, this feels just good. You don't always feel good when you wake up, but sometimes there's that sweet little time where you say, man, this feels just good. Well, we read in this passage that King David had been given rest. See that there in verse 1. He'd been given rest from all his enemies by the Lord above. And this was a pleasant thing for David, but also for all the people who were under him. Likewise, Jesus, who's related to David, often called the Son of David because he's descended from him, is given rest from all his enemies when he is raised from the dead and ascends on high, and God the Father seats Jesus, his Son, at his own right hand. And we read about that in Hebrews 1:2, that after Jesus had made propitiate atonement for our sins, he had cleansed us from our sins, that he sat down at the right hand of God. And he's given us rest from all his enemies, like David here. David had been fighting the enemies of God's people when he was a general under King Saul, and then before that, before he was an official soldier, he had fought against Goliath, and now David's had all these battles where he's fought, and the Lord gives David rest from all his enemies. But Jesus is given like rest. He had been opposed by the Jews during his time on earth. Jesus had opposed by the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I mean, all the different groups had opposed him. The Romans had opposed him and ultimately put him on a cross. But we also read in Scripture that Jesus had more significant enemies from whom he had been given rest. And Jesus, having come and taken on a human body, experienced a weariness of the physical body, and he was given rest in that sense too. Rest over his and our enemy of death in his resurrection, and rest and victory over his enemy Satan. And we read, and Bob read for us there, we read along in Hebrews chapter 2, that Satan had held the keys of sin and death. And Jesus took those keys. We read about that in Revelation as well. Jesus identifies himself as the one who holds the keys to death and Hades. He's taken those from Satan. He has victory over him. God the Father has given rest to Jesus, his Son, the Son of David, rest from all his enemies. And so if you'd like to fill out blanks in an outline, you're welcome to do that. It's there in your bulletin there. If you want to just listen, that's fine too. But in our introduction there, to set the scene for us, we realize these couple of things. One, or your A there, God the Father, out of love for his Son, God the Father, out of love for his Son, has provided for his Son Jesus rest from all his enemies. So Jesus has lived here on earth and had all the chaos of life that we experience, but God has given him rest from all his enemies, even the enemies, the ultimate enemies of sin and death. And then B, why do we care that Jesus has been given rest from all his enemies? We care because your king's, that's your blank, your king's rest means that you have rest too. Your king's rest means that you have rest too. Think about this situation in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. If David had been given rest from all his enemies, what did that mean for you as one of God's people living there under King David? You had rest from all your enemies too. If David had rest from all his enemies, then, well, you were under David. If no one was coming to attack David, well, no one was coming to attack you. And you could live in your home there in Israel without fear of looking over the horizon, or without fear of some reporter, some messenger running into your little town or by your farmhouse, whatever it was, and saying, not the redcoats are coming, but the Philistines are coming. Rest. You just wake up and not have to worry about it. You could be out in your field all by yourself without having to worry if you saw something move that it wasn't some foreign army coming. Because God himself had given David rest from all his enemies. And what that meant for you as an Israelite was God had given you rest. By virtue of the rest he had given David, he had given you rest from all your enemies. And so the reason that we care that Jesus has been given rest from all his enemies is that Jesus is our king, like David was the king of God's people of old. And so if Jesus has been given rest from sin and death, from all his enemies, then we get to experience that rest too. And so that's why we care. It's great to know that Jesus still is the conclusion of whether he's going to defeat Satan up in the air, or whether anyone will be raised from the dead and go into heaven when they die, like Jesus has done. That's not up in the air. And so we can know as we're kind of out in the field all by ourselves in our lives, so to speak, that we have rest. We don't have to worry. And so that's good news for us. Our King's rest means that we have rest too. So our point number 3 here, yes, point number 3, because point 1 and 2 were last week. Last week we talked about how Jesus gives us rest here now in our lives. He gives us rest from trying to be good enough for God. Gives us rest in the midst of our circumstances, which are often not great. We can have rest of soul, right? That's our declaration of the gospel. Again this morning, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." So we get to experience rest in our souls today. But we go on from this, and there are 2 other aspects, or 2 other time periods, or 2 other major events for us in which the rest of our King will mean rest for us. And that's your number 3 here. Be loyal to Jesus. This passage here is saying, be loyal to Jesus, just like in the Old Testament. Be loyal to David. In him you have rest. Don't look for another king. Don't look when David dies for someone else's son to give you rest. Be loyal to David. Be loyal to the sons of David. Be loyal to those who come after David. And for us, the one who's come after David is Jesus. He's the final son of David. So we want to be loyal to Jesus. Happy, that's your next blank, happy in his kingdom. Just like God's people could be happy under David's kingdom. This is great. You know, they could talk to each other and they could say, remember during Saul's days, the Philistines would come in and we couldn't even make swords. Remember that? It tells they didn't even have swords because the Philistines had come in and taken all the swords away from them and didn't allow blacksmiths in the land to make swords there. And they had to buy, a plowing equipment from the Philistines at exorbitant prices. So they're impoverished when David wasn't king. But God's people could say, under David's kingship, they could be happy and they'd say, this is great. I've got a blacksmith like 5 miles away. And I can make a sword, I can order a plow, whatever I need. This is great. And if the Philistines were to come in, David would raise up the army and he's never been beaten by them. He kind of beat the whole army by himself one time when he faced Goliath. And so we can be happy in Jesus' kingdom because he is our king. If Jesus is your king, all things ultimately are well. So be loyal to Jesus, happy in his kingdom, because not only do you have rest here now, but also we can look forward to enduring future rest. EFR, for those of you who like to abbreviate. Yeah, that's a great abbreviation, right? Enduring future rest. So look forward, that's your blank. Look forward in faith to the rest he will give you when you die. Look forward to the rest that Jesus will give you when you die. So not only do you have rest of soul now in the midst of your circumstances, rest from your having to just work hard and try to please the Lord, which you can never fully do to earn salvation, but look forward to the rest he will give you when you die. So next line there for you, be loyal to Jesus and trust his kingly power, because the rest he has received and experiences now in heaven, he will give to you upon your death when you join him there. I'll repeat that. Be loyal to Jesus and trust his kingly power. When you face your death, whether it's someone stops all of a sudden in the middle, the road when you're leaving church here this morning, or when you're approaching the end of your life, as you approach death, look forward in faith to the rest that he will give you when you die. Jesus has received that rest. He died, and he received rest from the Father. And so we walk in his path. He's our king. We will die, and we'll receive rest from him. He will give you rest upon your death. So trust in his kingly power, the rest he has received and experiences now in heaven, he will give to you upon your death when you join him there. So verse 1 becomes true of you. When you die, Jesus will give you rest from all your enemies. You will still be in that blessedness of being in Jesus' kingdom, in the kingdom of the Son of David when you die, and you'll have rest from all your enemies. There's no other king, there's no other God who provides this for you, who will protect you from death or grant you rest upon death. Many other religions provide for people maybe a philosophy of life or a way to live, or maybe are a means for things being better for you right now. But at the heart of Christianity is this promise of rest in death, and that death is really the better thing than life right now. Because life right now, we have chaos. So don't look to other philosophies, don't look to prosperity gospel that promises you good things now, a better life now, because what we really need is a solution to our problem of death, and that's what Jesus provides for us. Apart from King Jesus, a person, when they die, they're in chaos. So David provides rest. David's people have rest from all their enemies, and we have this same rest as we are under Jesus. Revelation 14:13 puts it this way: those who die in the Lord from now on, post-cross, since Jesus has died, those who die in the Lord with faith in him from now on will be blessed, and they will rest from their labor. Key words. Those who die in the Lord from now on will rest from their labor. For us who are Christians, it is blessing to die. It's good to die. It's like, finally. Some of you know who R.C. Sproul is. When I was first in seminary, I went down to Orlando and I saw this note on a bulletin board at the seminary, and it said that R.C. Sproul, when he tapes his radio sessions, he likes to do so in front of a live audience. And so here are the dates where he will be recording these sessions, his radio sessions, and so you can go to this place. And so I was there May 27th, and school didn't start until about August 1st, so I had plenty of time on my hands. And so I went over and heard some of these, and so I go into this building, this recording studio that didn't look like much. And I went in there, and there's RC and a group of people around there, mostly retirees, because it's Tuesday morning. You have a lot of that in Florida, too. A lot of retirees there. But I sit down in the circle there, and I'm like, wow, this is kind of surreal. Seeing some, sitting there with somebody I'd seen in videos and listened to lectures and that kind of thing. And he told this joke about, if you're one who understands the Bible's teaching on God's utter control of all things, that God is sovereign. There are some Christians that think that everything's kind of up to us. And he says, so what's the difference between the person who understands that God is in control of all things and the person who thinks everything's up to us? He said, when they fall down the stairs, what's the difference? And we all sat there and said, we were nervous. We didn't want to get the wrong answer in front of this famous theologian. And so we didn't say anything. And so he said, the person who doesn't understand that God's in control of all things, he winds up at the bottom of the stairs and he says, I knew I should have lifted my foot higher. But the person who understands God's in control of all things gets to the bottom of the stairs, having fallen all the way down the stairs, and says, glad that's over. but that's who we are. We are, we've got this God who controls all things, and we're like, we get to the end of our lives, we come to death, and we say, glad that's over. That was a lot of chaos. Blessed are those who die in the Lord from now on, for they will rest from their life. No more falling down the stairs. We say, yeah, my whole life was falling down the stairs. Glad that's over. Now I have rest. Okay. Hebrews 2:14 and 15 says this, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, Jesus did, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who were all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. So instead of this slavery, this toiling, this chaos in our lives, we have rest from our labor in our lives. That is, if Jesus is your king, you no longer need to fear your enemy of death, because Jesus has defeated this enemy of yours by his resurrection. He has overcome death, and your death has been overcome as well. You will be brought into rest when you die. Your body will stay here, like we read in our confession of faith this morning. Your body will stay here in the grave, but your soul will immediately pass into glory, and you will see Jesus face to face. That's good news. Um, it reminded me as I was thinking about this week. There was a commercial in the 70s. A lot of commercials in the 70s were pretty fun. Fun in a different way than commercials are today. But there was a commercial for Calgon. Remember Calgon, you older people like me? Calgon was a powder that created bubble bath. So you could sprinkle Calgon to your, the running water out, into your bath. And there was this woman, I looked it up, you can look it up on YouTube to get the words right. She's standing there and she says, "The traffic, the boss," and she has this boss yelling at his workers, "The baby," and then the baby's crying, "The dog," and the dog's barking. "That does it. Calgon, take me away." And the narrator comes on and says, "Lose your cares in the luxury of a Calgon bath. Calgon softens the water to leave skin feeling silky smooth as it lifts your spirits." And then the woman says, "I love it," as she sits there in her bubble bath. The narrator comes back on and says, "The soft, luxurious, fragrant world of Calgon." Rest. Jesus will take your soul away when you die. If you know the old gospel song, "I'll Fly Away." That's what it's talking about. When we die, our soul, we do go in soul to be with Jesus in heaven, and our utter bliss begins. So be loyal to Jesus. Don't doubt. Just keep tracking on with Jesus. He's the only one that provides this victory over death and rest. He's the only one that makes you look forward to death coming upon you. I had a professor in seminary who said he looked forward to death. He just hoped he didn't say anything stupid on his deathbed. So maybe we have fear of that, but really, death is something we can look forward to because of our faith in Jesus, because God the Father has given rest to Jesus from all his enemies. Jesus has defeated Satan, who held, past tense, the keys to death. And he no longer holds those keys. Jesus does. Fourth thing. Be loyal to Jesus. So again, be loyal to Jesus. Happy in his kingdom because of what we talked about. Point 3, when you die, you go to rest. But also look forward in faith to the rest he will give you when he comes again. So you can look forward to the rest that you will have in soul when you die. But it's also a different thing and even a greater thing when Jesus comes again, the rest he will give to you. So threefold rest here. Rest in your life now. Rest in the midst of the chaos of your circumstances. You can have rest in your soul in the midst of your friends dying and you being sick and your washing machine not working. Our washing machine's not working right now. We have a spare actually, so we're using the spare. But I found out I could buy a $25 part, but it would cost me about 5 hours of labor. So I'm in the midst of 5 hours of labor right now. So I've got little, metal cuts, and you work with metal, that kind of thing. That's chaos. But we can look forward to the rest that Christ will give to us, not only in this life and soul, and I'm at rest with being in the midst of 5 hours of labor. Can you imagine? They would just tell me, the shop would just tell me buy a new laundry machine because the 5 hours of labor would cost that much, right? But we can look forward to the rest that we'll have when we die, but also the ultimate rest of when Jesus comes back. And Bob read about that to us this morning in 1 Corinthians 15 and in Revelation 21. So, number 1 in your outline there, know that when Jesus returns, you will have total rest or complete rest or full rest, body and soul. So right now we have soul in the midst of chaos. When we die, we have soul not in the midst, or we have rest. Our souls have rest not in the midst of chaos. Our souls have rest in the midst of no chaos, just peace. But when Jesus comes, our bodies and souls have rest in the midst of no chaos. So you'll have total rest, body and soul, on earth when he makes all things new. You know, that's important, Jesus making all things new. When things aren't new, I have old cars. Our newest car is a 2005. We have my daughter's car is a 2005. My car is a 2005. Betsy's car is a 2004. And so I've been doing a lot of mechanical work lately, looking up things on YouTube and getting my hands dirty that way too. And it's gotten to the point I've just bought a whole box of those gloves, the mechanics gloves, which are awesome. But when things aren't new, you've got labor, right? And you reach that point with a car where you say, you know what, it's just not worth it. I'm just going to get something newer or new. Then I don't have to worry about it. It doesn't matter if it's the cheapest brand of car available. If it's new, it will not cause me problems. And Jesus comes and he makes all things new, and that relieves us of labor, right? We got a lot of labor because of the corruption, the decaying going on. If you're a little bit older, you get medications that you take. That's laborious. Yeah, make sure you've taken it and have some system, that kind of thing. All kinds of stuff going on. I spend as much time stretching after I run sometimes as I do running. Because if I don't, I'm going to be in trouble. And so Jesus comes, body and soul. When he comes, he makes all things new, and that relieves us of our labor. In other words, 1 Corinthians 15, our bodies will be new. Our confession of faith talks about this. We read that. We declared that as what we believe. 1 Corinthians 15:42. Paul writes, so it will be with the resurrection of the dead when our bodies are raised. The body that is sown perishable. That's what we have now. Perishable bodies. Bodies that are decaying unto death. Just getting worse and worse and worse and worse unto death. That those bodies that are perishable will be raised imperishable, not decaying. Not just new and starting over, but new and staying new. No labor of upkeep. I was telling some of you yesterday at bowling, I enjoy running. Some people don't enjoy running. I enjoy running, and I wish that my body could just run and run and run. Because I live a half mile from the Neuse River Trail. A half mile from the Neuse River, literally. And it's downhill to get there. Okay, it's 71 feet downhill. That's what my little app tells me. And I get there, and I wish I could run for like 3 hours and just among the trees and next to the river. I can't because of my body. My body can't keep up. But, if I had a new body that just stayed new, that didn't need to stretch after I ran because the muscles are starting to spasm, that'd be great to just, spend all that time, especially in the fall, when the weather's just right there. But that's what we'll have when Jesus comes back. Bodies, and it's physical. It's not just soul. It's one of the misunderstandings that can be common today in the church. And years ago, we did a whole Sunday school series on this, death in the afterlife and all that kind of thing. When you die, your soul is resurrected, but your body stays in the grave, and it decays. And if you exhume the body, you'd see it's decaying there. But when Jesus comes back, it's body and soul, both. And so let's talk about that imperishable body. 1 Corinthians 15:52 says, in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, okay, this is second coming, the last trumpet, the trumpet will sound, and the dead those who are in their graves, that's what Paul's talking about at the last trumpet, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. Our bodies will be changed. Paul talks about it in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 also. There'll be those who are dead already, whose bodies are in the graves and whose souls are in heaven. And Paul says when Jesus comes again, those bodies will be raised first and joined with their souls. But those who are still alive, Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4, they will meet Jesus without dying. And their bodies will just simply, they'll never have that split of body and soul. I hope that's true. I hope that happens today. But they will just be raised and given that imperishable body. Revelation 21:5. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new, including your body. I'm making everything new. Now, this is Jesus speaking at his second coming when he comes and establishes the new heavens and new earth. So if things aren't new, it causes us labor. But you know what also causes us labor? And those of you in the working world know this. When you have a boss who's a bad administrator, right? Who says, oh, no, let's do this now. And you've already done all this work over here, and then you got to change gears and do all this. That causes extra labor when you have a bad administrator over you. And guess what? Jesus is a king. That's an administrator. And he's a perfect administrator. And he tells us exactly what to do, the right thing to do, the first time. And so that means we have extra work. And the stress that comes from changing gears because the one who was our superior got it wrong the first time or changes his mind. Jesus doesn't get it wrong the first time or change his mind. He just simply tells us what's good and right to do, and we do it, and none of our actions are wasted. And so, number 2 there, at that time when Jesus returns, that is in the new heavens and new earth, Jesus will reign in the new Jerusalem on earth over all the church on earth. So Jesus will reign. He'll be that perfect administrator over us, but this will be on earth. Okay, now hear this. You will not be in heaven forever. Because Jesus brings the heavenly Jerusalem down to earth. He takes residence on earth and says, behold, I have made everything new. That's Revelation chapter 21. In Revelation 20, we see that hell is not forever because hell is poured down into the lake of fire, which is forever. Okay? And the lake of fire is for the resurrected who haven't believed in Jesus. And that is forever. But for us who believe, for us who love Jesus, who have faith in him, that we, body and soul, are with him here on earth, which has been made all new. Without sorrow, without pain. Revelation 21:1 says this. Then I saw a new heaven, John says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. John doesn't say, then I went to heaven. No. John says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Okay, did you hear that? The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. So this earth with weeds, with dandelions, with its corruption, with its pollution, all that kind of thing, with its algae or too much algae or whatever, with its imbalances, it's passed away because Jesus comes down and he makes everything new. And so then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Verse 2, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. He will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. Total rest here on earth, body and soul. That's what we have to look forward to. So you know those perfect days like I talked about running in the autumn, where it's just the right temperature and you go out and the wind feels just right on your skin and your hair. That's what we're talking about. The enjoyment, you can have enjoyment in your soul, but there's also physical enjoyment that we can have. And the smells, I guess chocolate chip cookies all the time or something like that. In the new heavens and the new earth. And so that's rest for our bodies on earth in the new heavens and new earth. And then number 3, when enemies are present, we don't have rest, do we? If your wife has said, I'm going to kill you someday, and she's serious, that makes you sleep a little bit on guard, doesn't it? If you feel something, bump in the bed a little bit, you might take a quick look to make sure she doesn't have some weapon there. But if your enemy is alive and active, Catherine, have you been thinking about this? If your enemy is about you, like we talked about at the beginning, if you're in David's kingdom and in the field there, but you have active enemies, you're a little bit scared. But one thing Jesus does when he returns is he puts our enemies away for good. And we read in Revelation 19 that he takes Satan himself and all Satan's helpers, the angels that have fallen with Satan, that Scripture calls demons, and he puts them into the lake of fire as well, probably in advance of those who haven't believed in Jesus. And people who have persecuted you or made fun of you for your faith, that mean, this is wonderful here. We can come and talk about Jesus and no one makes fun of us. We can sing loudly, no one makes fun of us. But do that at your workplace, and you will get made fun of. But Jesus takes all that and he removes it from us. When your enemies are present, you can't rest, right? If you're in World War II and you're sitting in that, or World War I and you're sitting in that trench, you can't completely rest. You're sleeping on the side of that trench with your rifle in hand, in case the Germans come, and try to sneak across to the barbed wire, or in case some of the mustard gas is thrown out. You can't rest if your enemies are present. But what Jesus does when he comes again is he rids the earth of all our enemies. This is when Jesus ultimately does his kingly duty of defeating, subjugating all his and our enemies, humans and supernatural enemies, Satan and his demons, all removed from us. We don't have rest as long as there are enemies alive and working. Peter says in 1 Peter 5:8, your enemy, the devil, prowls about like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Jesus says over and over, be on your guard. Keep watch. Paul says, flee from temptation. See, we're always on guard now. But when Jesus comes back, we don't have to be on guard anymore. Like when we come in here. We don't have to be on guard anymore. We can just let our hair down for those of us who have hair. So number 3, at that time, at the new time of the new heavens and new earth, in the new heavens and new earth, all our enemies and all that would do us harm will be removed. That's your blank. Will be removed from the earth. We'll have rest from all our enemies. This 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 1 will be true in its fullest sense. Rest from all our enemies. Revelation 19, Jesus puts them all away, seals them up so that we don't have to deal with them anymore. No more persecution, no more being made fun of, no more not being able to express our faith without fear of some kind. And then chapter 20, we see this as well with human beings who haven't received the gospel. And then Revelation chapter 21, verses 7 and 8. Bob read these for us. Let me read it again. He who overcomes, so that is, those who are loyal to Jesus, looking forward to his coming, and have overcome this life through faith in Jesus. He who overcomes will inherit all this.
the new heavens and the new earth, where there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, where every tear will be wiped away from our eyes. He who overcomes will inherit all this. And Jesus says, and I will be his God, he will be my son. Verse 8, but the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, those who cause us trouble as we try to believe, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. So, it's not that we today look at non-believers and say, you've got it coming to you, buddy, like that. But this is comfort for us, because those folks, when backed into a corner, are trying to make us be unfaithful. And they're doing that through various means. Oh, you don't need to do that. Or why are you doing that? All this, we got this pressure on us all the time to be unfaithful to the Lord, to not follow him fully in all his commands and all his ways. But these things will be put away. Their place will be another place, not the new heavens and new earth. They won't be living beside us. The only people who will be living beside us are us. And that'll be nice. I've been talking to one of you recently, and it's like, all my week is just awful, but I come here and everything's good. It's just all rest from the chaos that I'm experiencing in my life right now. This is a good place, and that'll be what we experience over all the earth. Rest. So you with Jesus will have total rest from all your enemies. So summary for you. We sang again this morning, like a river glorious. What a great chorus, right? Stayed upon Jehovah, hearts are fully blessed, finding, as he promised, perfect peace and rest. Stayed upon Jehovah, hearts are fully blessed, finding, as he promised, perfect peace and rest. From the one who's been given rest from all his enemies by the Father. So summary. Trust that God the Father has given rest. He's given rest. He's given Jesus rest from all his and your enemies. Therefore, in your life, until that day when you see him face to face, whether by your death or whether by his coming again, be loyal to Jesus. Be loyal to Jesus as your king. He's the David who means the Philistines aren't going to attack your house and burn it down. Be loyal to Jesus as your king and look forward in faith to the rest he will give you at death and upon his return.